My wife mocked my small business while I funded her luxury lifestyle. Now she's jobless, and my company's worth millions. I'm a 31-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've believed in building something of my own. After 8 years in a corporate job that drained my soul, I finally took the leap. I quit. Everyone called me crazy, but my wife Rachel looked at me with those big, proud eyes and said, "You're my visionary." That moment stuck with me. It made the fear feel worth it. I started small, an e-commerce brand selling handmade furniture. Nothing fancy, just passion, wood, and sweat. I converted our garage into a workshop, smell of varnish and sawdust mixing with my determination. I'd spend 14-hour days sketching designs, sanding planks, packaging orders by hand. Every night, I'd come upstairs, sore but hopeful, and Rachel would be scrolling through her phone, asking, "When do you think we'll start seeing real money?" At first, I laughed it off. I told her success takes time, and because I didn't want her to feel deprived, I kept funding her comforts, designer handbags, weekend spa trips, dinner dates at her favorite places. I wanted her to feel proud of me, not burdened by my dream. The thing is, I didn't see how one-sided it had already become. She loved the lifestyle, not the struggle behind it. When I'd talk about branding or supplier issues, she'd nod, barely listening. But when it came to her wants, I always made it happen, even if it meant dipping into our savings. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if I made a mistake, if chasing freedom was worth the growing distance in her eyes. Still, I told myself she believed in me. I needed to believe that she did, because if she didn't, then maybe I'd given up everything for someone who only saw me as a means to her next luxury. And deep down, I already feared that day was coming. It didn't happen all at once. The cracks came slowly, like hairline fractures in glass you don't notice until the light hits them just right. Rachel started changing after the first few months of my business. The enthusiasm she once had, the proud smiles, the morning coffee she'd bring while I worked in the garage, all of it faded into something colder. Sharper one night as I was sanding a table, she leaned against the doorway in her silk robe and sighed. "You know, Daniel, maybe this isn't working. You could always go back to corporate. At least then we'd have stability." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it cut deeper than any insult. I looked up, hands covered in dust, and said quietly, "This is stability. I'm building it for us." She didn't respond. She just walked away. The sound of her heels on the stairs echoed louder than my heartbeat. From then on, the distance grew. She stopped asking about my day, stopped visiting the workshop altogether. Our conversations turned transactional. Grocery lists, bills, social plans. When I told her I'd landed my first few bulk orders, she barely looked up from her phone. "That's nice," she muttered, thumbs tapping rapidly. Meanwhile, her weekends became girls' trips, her nights out stretched later and later. I'd wait up, pretending to work, just to hear her come home and toss her heels aside without a word. I tried to convince myself she was just stressed, that she'd come around once the money started flowing. But the truth was, I'd already lost her emotional support, the one thing I thought was unshakable. Every time she looked at me now, I could feel the unspoken disappointment behind her silence. And even though I didn't know it yet, that silent judgment was about to become something far worse: public humiliation. By the time my business turned a year old, Rachel had practically stopped pretending to care. I'd tell her about small wins, a new supplier, a returning customer, a good week of sales, and she'd respond with a distracted "That's good, babe," without even looking up from her phone. She'd be scrolling through Instagram, eyes lighting up at photos of her friends' vacations, their husbands in suits, their houses gleaming. I started noticing how she compared me not directly, but through subtle comments. "Did you see Claire's husband? He just got promoted again." Or, "We should go somewhere nicer next time. The Smiths went to Paris last month." I'd nod, smile weakly, and change the subject. Deep down, I felt smaller every time she said it. I remember one particular evening, I had just finished building a custom dining table. It's one of my best pieces yet. I called her out to see it. "Look," I said, excitement bubbling in my voice. "This design could be the one that takes off." She stepped into the garage, looked around for half a second, then shrugged. It's nice, Daniel, but maybe you should focus on something more profitable. The smell of fresh varnish mixed with something bitter inside me. I wasn't just tired anymore. I was starting to feel invisible. She stopped inviting me to her office gatherings. When her friends came over, she'd downplay what I did, calling it his little furniture hobby. Each jab left a bruise I couldn't show. I still loved her, or maybe I loved the version of her I met years ago, the one who believed in me. But now, I could feel her slipping further away. One dismissive glance at a time, and I didn't know it yet, but the next time she decided to joke about my dream, it wouldn't just hurt, it would humiliate me in front of everyone. It was supposed to be just another dinner party. Rachel had invited a group of her coworkers and their partners, the kind of people who spoke in polished tones, about quarterly bonuses and luxury getaways. I didn't mind. I'd been at those tables before. I knew how to blend in. But this night was different. I remember standing in our kitchen, wearing the one blazer I hadn't stained with sawdust, arranging appetizers while Rachel laughed in the living room. When I walked in, one of her friends asked, "So, Daniel, how's that little furniture business going?" Before I could answer, Rachel smirked and said, "Oh, you mean his garage project? He's still playing Bob the Builder." The room erupted in laughter. I froze. My throat tightened, but I forced a small smile. "It's actually going well," I said quietly. "We're growing," Rachel rolled her eyes. "Sure, babe. Just don't forget to clean up the sawdust before you track it into the house again." Another round of laughter. My ears burned. My chest ached. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. The rest of the night blurred into white noise, fake smiles. Wine glasses clinking, her friends praising her dress while I sat in silence. When everyone finally left, I asked, "Why would you say that?" "You embarrassed me." She looked at me like I was the problem. "Relax, Daniel. It was a joke. Don't be so sensitive." I slept on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, realizing something had shifted for good. It wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about respect. And deep down, a part of me knew I'd just lost hers completely. But what she didn't know was that I was done begging for it. The morning after that dinner party, something in me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized I'd been living my life trying to prove my worth to someone who'd already decided I wasn't enough. For weeks, her words replayed in my head. Garage project, Bob the Builder, lucky if it works. Every insult became fuel. I stopped trying to defend my dream to her. Instead, I let silence do the talking. I poured everything into my business. I'd wake up before dawn, work until my hands went numb, and fall asleep beside unfinished prototypes. I took a small business loan and invested in proper tools, new branding, and a website. I reached out to local influencers to feature my work. One video, a handcrafted walnut dining table under warm lighting, went viral. Orders flooded in overnight. When I told Rachel, she didn't smile. She didn't even look surprised. "Well, about time something worked out," she said flatly. That was it. No pride. "No, I'm proud of you. It's just the same cold indifference." But that night, while she was out with her friends, I stood in the workshop surrounded by stacks of orders and realized something important. I didn't need her approval anymore. My products started gaining traction, and small interior design firms began reaching out for partnerships. For the first time, I felt like the dream was becoming real. Still, I didn't celebrate. I'd learned the hard way that sharing joy with the wrong person can turn it into shame. I began keeping parts of my success private. Rachel noticed the shift, the way I smiled to myself, the calls I took in private. She didn't like it. I could see curiosity mixing with jealousy in her eyes. And when she found out about the next thing, the secret she'd hidden from me all along, that jealousy would explode into betrayal. It started with a late-night phone call from the bank. The man on the other end mentioned overdue credit balances and pending payments. I'd never missed a bill in my life. When I asked for details, he listed charges I didn't recognize: designer boutiques, international flights, hotel stays. My voice went cold. "Those aren't mine? The next morning, I confronted Rachel at breakfast. "Do you know anything about these charges?" I asked, sliding the printed statement across the table. She didn't even blink. "Oh, those. Relax, Daniel. I used our joint card. I'll pay it back when my bonus comes in." I stared at her. "You maxed out 3 credit cards on luxury trips and bags. Do you realize we're in debt?" She shrugged, sipping her latte. "You're so dramatic. It's called living, Daniel. You should try it sometime." That was the moment I saw her clearly, not as my wife, but as someone who saw me as a safety net, not a partner. I'd been funding her lifestyle while breaking my back to build a business she openly mocked. I wanted to scream to make her understand the damage she'd done, but I realized arguing was pointless. She didn't respect me, and you can't fix contempt with logic. So, I did something I'd never done before. I stopped reacting. I smiled, said, "You're right," and walked away. That night, I stayed late in the workshop, surrounded by sawdust and silence. I made a quiet decision to start protecting myself. I opened a new business account under my name only. I began moving profits out of the joint one. Rachel didn't notice. She was too busy planning her next girls' trip. But what she didn't realize was that I was done being her wallet. From that moment on, I wasn't just building furniture. I was building my escape. From that night forward, I stopped sharing anything about my business. The man who once overshared every idea, every win, every dream, went silent. Rachel thought she'd broken me, that her mockery had killed my drive. But behind that quiet mask, I was working harder than ever. My workshop became my sanctuary. I started waking before sunrise, the cool air filled with the hum of power tools and the scent of oak dust. My hands were blistered, my back ached, but my mind was clear. I'd found something stronger than love: focus. I streamlined operations, hired 2 part-time assistants, and began targeting interior design firms directly. The shift worked. Orders doubled, then tripled. Rachel barely noticed. Her days were brunches and shopping trips. Sometimes she'd walk into the garage, wrinkle her nose, and say, "Still doing this?" "You're obsessed." I'd just nod, smile faintly, and go back to work. Because what she didn't know was that I'd already incorporated the business in my name alone. Every cent, every deal, every new client now belonged to me. One evening, I got an email that changed everything. A well-known influencer wanted to collaborate. They loved my craftsmanship and wanted to feature my brand in their home design video. I felt my chest tighten with disbelief. This was the break I'd been chasing for years. When I told Rachel, she barely reacted. "Influencers don't pay bills," she said, turning back to her glass of wine. I remember smiling as I replied, "We'll see." The next few weeks were a blur. The video went live and orders exploded. The small workshop that once mocked me now buzzed with growth. But just as my dream was catching fire, I overheard something that turned that fire into fury, words from Rachel's mouth that would end whatever. Love I still had for her. It happened on a Thursday night. One of those evenings when the house felt too quiet to be peaceful. Rachel was in the living room on the phone with someone, her voice soft but dripping with disdain. I wasn't eavesdropping at first, until I heard my name. "Oh, please," she scoffed, laughing. "He's not some entrepreneur. He's my personal ATM. I'll ride this out until I find someone who can actually provide." My heart stopped. I stood frozen behind the half-closed door, her laughter echoing in my head. Every sacrifice I'd made, every late night, every moment of exhaustion, it all twisted into a cruel joke. She wasn't just mocking my dream anymore. She was mocking me. When she hung up, I stepped into the room. "Who were you talking to?" I asked quietly. She jumped, startled. "Just a friend." "Why are you listening in?" I stared at her for a long time. "You know what, Rachel? Don't worry. You won't have to ride this out much longer." She smirked. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. I just walked away, calm, collected, but hollow inside. That night I made a list. Not of revenge, but of liberation. I gathered documents, screenshots, texts, everything that proved her spending, her lies, her financial recklessness. I met with my lawyer the next morning and filed for divorce. Quietly, no drama, no warnings, before leaving. I made one last move. I transferred the mortgage and debt-laden cards fully into her name. The house she flaunted to her friends would become her financial prison. I packed my things, left my keys on the kitchen counter, and walked out. Rachel didn't even notice I was gone until the court summons arrived a week later. And by then, I was already gone, living in a small, rented apartment, surrounded by boxes of success waiting to be shipped. I thought that was the end. But what came next was something I never expected. My rise, those first few weeks alone, were eerily quiet. I'd wake up in my one-bedroom apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes, the scent of varnish still clinging to my clothes. For the first time in years, there was no tension, no judgment, just silence. It wasn't peace yet, but it was freedom. I threw myself into work with tunnel vision. Orders kept pouring in from the influencers feature, and soon, interior designers started tagging my brand online. One morning, I opened my inbox and saw an email from a venture group they wanted to invest. My fingers trembled as I read it. The same garage project Rachel mocked was now getting attention from serious investors. Weeks turned into months, and I barely recognized my own life. I upgraded from the apartment to a small warehouse space, hired a real team, and launched new product lines. My brand, Driftwood Designs, began trending across social media. People loved the craftsmanship, the handmade soul in a mass-produced world. I smiled every time I read that, because that's exactly what it was. Built from heartbreak, powered by endurance. Meanwhile, word got back to me about Rachel. Her job had downsized. The friends who used to tag her in luxury posts had disappeared. She'd moved out of the house after the bank came calling. Someone even told me she'd started working at a local boutique, the same kind of place she used to look down on. I didn't feel joy. Not yet, just as one night, as I scrolled through old messages, I realized something. Every insult she threw had become my motivation. Every time she said, "You'll never make it," I worked harder. Every time she mocked me, I built something new. But life wasn't done with irony yet, because soon, Rachel would come back into my world. Not out of love, but desperation. It had been over a year since I walked out of that house. My company had grown beyond anything I'd imagined: a small team, a warehouse buzzing with energy, and an upcoming partnership with a luxury design firm. Life felt steady again. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Rachel. Can we talk?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen. My stomach tightened, not from longing, but from old reflexes. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity won. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe downtown. She arrived looking different. The shine was gone. Her hair was messy. Her designer bag looked worn, and her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone whose world had crumbled. "You look good," she said, forcing a smile. "Thanks," I replied calmly. "You too." There was an awkward pause before she started. "I just wanted to apologize. I wasn't fair to you. I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean." Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the mirror. I listened quietly, sipping my coffee. Then she added softly, "Maybe we could start over." I leaned back and looked at her, the woman who once mocked everything I stood for. Then I reached into my briefcase and handed her a card. She looked down, reading the embossed print. "Daniel Reyes, CEO, Driftwood Designs, Inc." Her eyes widened. You're the CEO." "Yeah," I said, smiling. "The same garage project you laughed at now employs 15 people." She looked like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. I stood up, placed some cash on the table, and said softly, "You were right, Rachel. I did find stability, just not with you." As I walked out, I didn't look back. The sound of the cafe door closing behind me felt like the final page turning. But what I didn't realize yet, the world was about to hear my story, and Rachel's humiliation was only beginning. A few weeks after that cafe meeting, a journalist from a popular online magazine reached out. They wanted to feature my company's story from garage dreams to $1 million brand. I hesitated at first, not wanting to air my past. But the writer insisted they'd focus on the journey, not the drama. So I agreed. When the article went live, I didn't expect what happened next. It exploded. The headline read, "He built a business his ex mocked. Now it's worth millions." I never mentioned Rachel by name, but the details were unmistakable to anyone who knew us. Within hours, people were tagging my company, reposting the story and leaving comments like "poetic justice at its finest," and some people only clap when you fail. I stayed quiet publicly. But inside, a storm of emotions brewed: pride, anger, closure. I hadn't wanted revenge, but this felt like the universe handling it for me. Then out of nowhere, Rachel called again. Her voice trembled. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "Do what?" I asked, calm but cold. "You made me look like a joke," she snapped. I exhaled slowly. "Rachel, you did that yourself." I just told my story. She hung up on me, but I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. For the first time, her opinion meant nothing. The weight I'd carried for years, the need to prove my worth, was gone. That week, sales tripled. My inbox flooded with opportunities. People wrote messages saying my story gave them courage to chase their dreams despite ridicule. I realized that maybe my pain had purpose. It wasn't just survival. It was fuel for others. Rachel faded into silence after that. But life wasn't done giving me closure. One final moment was waiting, and it would remind me just how far I'd come 2 years later. I was walking through a home design expo where my company had a featured booth. The place buzzed with life, spotlights on handcrafted tables, clients discussing orders, my team proudly wearing shirts with our logo, Driftwood Designs. I was in the middle of answering a journalist's question when I noticed her, Rachel, standing a few feet away, clutching a brochure, her eyes scanning the display with disbelief. For a moment, time froze. She looked older, tired, smaller somehow. Her once perfect nails were chipped, and she wore a faded coat that didn't fit her designer persona. When our eyes met, she hesitated, then walked over. "Daniel," she said softly, "this is incredible." "Thank you," I replied, professional, composed. She smiled weakly. "I always knew you'd make it." I almost laughed, but instead I nodded. I did too, eventually. There was no anger left, just distance, the kind that comes when you've outgrown the person who once defined your pain. My team called me over for a photo, and as the flash went off, I caught Rachel in the corner of my eye, staring not at me, but at the empire she'd mocked into existence. Later that night, as I packed up, I thought about everything that had happened. The sleepless nights, the ridicule, the heartbreak, and the quiet triumph that followed. I realized Rachel's betrayal wasn't my ending. It was the catalyst for everything that came next. Now, I'm married again to someone who believes in hard work, not appearances. We live simply, surrounded by the furniture I once built in a cramped garage. Sometimes when I sand the edge of a new design, I smile to myself and whisper, "This started with pain and ended with peace." Because in the end, the same dream she laughed at became the life she can't afford, and the lesson I'll never forget.